So I'm manipulating you, and there is nothing that film social media loves more than telling film students to go themselves. It is epic. It's endemic.
Damn it.
It is
Editing.
wild.
Bleep.
Oh, I've caught you in a trap. This is the New Year, New Me episode. We've been talking about that for a while. And by a while, I mean 2 hours. We just figured it out. To open up a new year, a very new year, it's literally the second, the day that we record this, we could talk about leaving film school, which is what I'm doing right now. Like I'm still technically in film school, doing post in the short that me and my friends made. But like I'm, for all intents and purposes, all of my coursework is done. I'm no longer going there on a regular basis. It's finished. However, I don't want to start off talking about my plans. So I'm manipulating you into talking about your own life now. I've caught you in a trap.
No,
Uh,
you haven't.
I was I was thinking we could talk a bit about your experience leaving film school, and your experience with film school is very, very different to mine. I think,
See?
yeah.
Sorted
Now
right.
you've brought it right around on me.
Well,
I'll get back to you. I'll find a way, because on that conversation about like whether or not it's good to go to film school in Australia, a lot of film schools are private institutions, like ones that are actually advertising themselves as like film schools. We got all the equipment and everything. There are a few public universities that offer equipment and tutoring and all that, but it's not really their primary draw, or they offer theoretical courses. If you want to become an on-set practitioner, you're probably more inclined to go to one of the private institutions or afters, which is the go-to for most people.
so just as a
But
side note, for anyone outside of Australia, AFTRS is
yeah,
the Australian Film, Television and Radio School.
the issue with Australia is the second you start going to a private institution for tertiary education, you are going to hear 64 reasons why it's the wrong thing to do. It's just the way it is. Australia has a checkered history with private institutions who offer tertiary education. Our public institutions are fantastic. People who are about to enter film school are going to experience this like terrible, terrible effect. And it actually doesn't go away. It happens throughout the experience. I was lucky to have a very, very great support system around me of people who knew that I was making an informed decision. But like, it's very likely that people who are outside the creative arts, people around you, are going to be like telling you that it's the wrong thing to do. And what doesn't help is that people who are in the creative arts are also telling you that it's the wrong thing to do. There is nothing that film social media loves more than telling film students to go themselves. It is epic. It's endemic.
Damn it.
It is
Editing.
wild.
Bleep. Bleep.
Yeah, and I mean, to a certain extent, it kind of makes sense. A lot of the people who are posting about this kind of thing have actually just done the whole pulling yourself up by your bootstraps kind of film experience, where they've just asked to be on a bunch of sets and gotten familiar with cameras and used the internet to learn things, which is excellent. It's wonderful. However, not everyone works like that, and I don't. And what informed my decision to go to film school was that I need structure when I'm learning, like enforced structure. I need reliable sources, and the way I see it is that a film lecturer is going to be a reliable source. I don't know if a forum or a YouTube video is going to be a reliable source that I want to build my entire film knowledge groundwork upon. In hindsight, there are a few things to keep in mind. The quality of the institution, very difficult to gauge prior to going to the institution. Very difficult. Also, depending on who you are, doesn't quite matter. If you have a lot of intrinsic motivation and the institution has a lot of great people, then you'll be fine. And also, do you need it? Do you need it? I need it because I need structured education. That's how I learn. At least to build a framework for what I'm going to build the rest of my knowledge on. I need structure and authoritative voices to tell me what I need to know. I can get that out of tertiary education. Yeah, it was just all about holding myself accountable as well. I knew that I'd be held accountable if I went to film school. I would be around a lot of other people who are like-minded, so I'd earn a lot of, the big thing you always hear about it is like, oh, you're going to get so many contacts, and then the number one argument against that is 54 grand for contacts. But like, unfortunately, it's pretty accurate and also very, very valuable. If you want to hang around like-minded people, if you need to be held accountable, if you need the structure that comes from academically focused learning, then yes, film school. If you think you have the intrinsic motivation and critical thinking skills and motivation, I've already said motivation, and all of these things, then you don't need film school. Whatever, who cares? Just if you're able to just email people at random. I can't do that, and I knew that, which is why I immediately pursued film school. Tangent over. What do you think?
I'm very much on the fence, which may seem disingenuous, as in me being a lecturer, being a film school graduate myself. I think I agree with you in terms of the structure. I also think that for a lot of people, probably majority of people, in terms of getting access to equipment,
Yes, that's also
that
the kicker.
is a big factor, particularly in somewhere like Australia with government funding of tertiary education. Yes, there may be a $54,000 price tag, but it isn't $54,000 upfront
No, it is
price tag. So,
debt. Yeah.
part of the argument goes, well, you could just put $50,000 into renting equipment.
See, the issue is
a bunch of YouTube tutorials
so true.
and teach yourself that equipment. And in some ways, I think that might actually be better because you get that time. You don't need to compete with other students. The longer a rental you have on equipment, the better a deal you're going to get on it, etc., etc., etc. However, you're going to have to find that $50,000.
Yeah, and the thing is, unfortunately, it's a $54,000 jumping off point. But like, if I spent that $54,000 on my own stuff, there would be a constant thing in the back of my mind telling me that it might be the wrong decision that I'm making. And I mean, the thing is, after film school, I'm going to be doing exactly what you just described anyway. I'm going to be, for the first time, going to actual rental houses and actually renting equipment and looking up YouTube tutorials on how to use it. I will be on the ARRI website, fiddling with their little menu that they have there. Like I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. It's ironic again that it's so hard to outline the merits of film school and not immediately have some kind of counter argument.
I said I'm on the fence. On the one hand, I don't think a tertiary education environment and structure is the best place for everyone. It also depends on what kind of ambitions you have within filmmaking. I think also I am very much biased here, but I do think that certain ways that traditional film schools go about teaching filmmaking are outdated.
Yeah, we spoke. I don't know if it's been in any published episodes, but we've spoken about this before. The way that it kind of focuses on film reel instead of film.
I also think that there is something about tertiary education in general in society where I am very much on the fence about teaching creative arts in a tertiary education environment, mainly because of the streamlining and the drive towards KPIs and measurable performance.
Sustainable.
Which, in terms of creative arts, where I see students meet the biggest challenge isn't in skill or technique or so-called talent. It is in structure, process, professionality, deliverability.
That was the most important part.
None of which are captured very well in tertiary education.
It loses
assessment methods.
I think it loses a bit of. I mean, there are a lot of things that are being done, especially in my experience, to kind of fight that. There was like a few things in the producing unit and a few things in your units that kind of fought against that. But there was a much greater focus on like, how good are you at this thing, instead of like, how good are you at communicating the ideas and delivering it and structuring yourself around a certain schedule and all these like actual parts about the logistics of the craft, and not just kind of slapping it all together. I think that like teaching editing workflow, for example. I'm not an expert in editing. It's not my area, but I think there's a bit of a disparity in the way that that is assessed, because you come up with an output, and the quality of that output doesn't necessarily mean that this person has sorted all their files into the right bin and worked in the format of the timeline correctly, and something other editing terminology that I totally understand.
I think for me, then that kind of segues nicely into another part of what I'm interested in. Looking back at your film school experience, what actually ended up matter?
Oof.
What did matter as opposed to what you thought was going to matter before you started film school, as in after you'd
Oh,
made the
pardon me.
decision to sign up and before your first lesson, what were the things you thought were going to matter in film school?
I don't know. It was a whole 2 years ago. It's been a pandemic since then. I actually can't remember any of those days anymore. They're all gone. My number one focus was kind of accumulated knowledge. I was like, oh, brilliant. I'll know my stuff, you know? And then the second you actually get started, you realize that there is just so much to know that you cannot learn in 2 years. It is not possible by any means. And what ends up actually mattering is your understanding of structure and workflow and roles and like you said, like professionalism and everything. You come in thinking that your accumulated knowledge is going to equal employability, whereas professionalism and experience is what actually equals employability. You don't come out knowing how to write a screenplay and suddenly you're employable. Like, you come out knowing how to sell a screenplay and who to pitch it to, and if you want to make it independently, how to run it through with people you want to make it to, like make it with. I did kind of come in thinking I was in like high school, where I learned my spelling and my grammar and critical thinking and everything, and I think I would just come up with like more knowledge of this one area, whereas it was more like, here's what the environment is, here is the world you're about to enter at the end of this degree, and here's how you should conduct yourself. Though that isn't necessarily explicitly taught, it did feel like it mattered more than the knowledge,
Can we try and find some more concrete examples?
Oh God.
What's one area, what's one skill? And let's take that one skill through from pre-film school into what it looks like now at the completion of film school. Screenwriting.
Mm.
So between the time that you made the decision to sign up for film school and the first lesson of screenwriting, what did you think you were going to learn about film screenwriting?
Oh yeah, it's great. Kind of like, it is a bit connected to what I was just talking about.
Mhm.
I don't think I came in with any wacky pretenses, because I already read up on screenwriting a bit before I went to film school. Like some of the more particularly cynical books as well, like Save the Cat, I'd like consumed beforehand. I came in thinking that I would learn. God, Jesus. Okay, this is not an easy set of questions at all. And to take a prolonged sip from my water.
It's
Hang
a
on.
trap. Something dark side.
I'm gonna smack my lips until I can think of an answer.
Oh,
uh,
let me put it a different way. In that same time period, between signing up for film school and starting your first lesson, and if we keep looking at screenwriting, what were the things about your screenwriting that you wanted to improve?
oh,
Does that make sense?
probably, yeah, probably, yeah. Okay, good, good. At the time, which was a bit of a you didn't know moment,
Mhm.
I wanted to improve content and characters and pace and story, and like all that, keeping it engaging, as well as just having like parameters to write by. But what you end up learning about screenwriting is that first you get it hammered into you that part of screenwriting is making the screenplay appealing, not necessarily making it good, making it appealing, which means enhancing readability, which means by like formatting it in a certain way, having a certain amount of dialogue per action line at a certain point, and you realize that instead of just telling a story, you're performing this balancing act of keeping the reader engaged the whole time. That is,
Retention.
if yeah, retention, exactly, which is a very important term to this particular podcast for several reasons. Yeah, so with screenwriting, for example, I came in thinking, okay, I'm going to fix my narratives and my characters and everything, and yeah, like you do learn all that stuff about narrative and character and structure and everything. However, I have learned more about narrative and character and structure from my own reading. What I learned from film school was the absolute basics of setting up an engaging storyline, writing a script that is readable and coherent, and this is going to sound so vain, but it's true, like aesthetically pleasing.
It's definitely a consideration. And I think
Literally.
I think with a lot of transitions from enthusiast to professional, I think it's very useful to do some role reversal. Put yourself in the position of the person who you are trying to pitch to.
Mm.
Imagine you've got 50 screenplays and your job is to decide, are they worth a second read?
And in this scenario, there's a good chance you're reading the first 20 pages and going, is this
Not
worth
even.
continuing? And then,
Not even.
like, first
It
10,
is
first
quite
5.
feasible to open the first page and just go, no.
There are some scripts where I've done that person. Like, I've done some light
Yep.
script reading on the side, and there are some scripts that you open up and just go, wow, I don't like it's I'm being paid. I'm not like it's my job to finish this, and I'm going to, but like I don't want to. Like it even outside of script reading, just like reading other scripts, my own scripts sometimes from ages ago, I'll open up like, yeah. So that's one of the you didn't know moments of all of film school was at least me learning that the readability of a script is more important than the content in a lot of ways in terms of like picking it up and reading it.
Lack of readability can deny access to the content. At the risk of digressing even further and wider, I'm wondering how different is the view of film school and being a beginning filmmaker now versus 25 years ago when I started.
Let's get into Kim's backstory. You have no excuses now. You're gonna tell us everything. Go.
Because of the higher cost of entry, the barrier of entry. I mean, like the barrier of entry, just even getting into film school or starting some sort of course was even higher. And I think for that reason, probably that whole access to the equipment was a much bigger factor in choosing film school, yes or no?
Yes.
Which meant that majority of students would do some kind of self-study beforehand, before even considering applying to film school.
Absolutely. There was no chance that I would have applied to film school if I didn't know anything prior.
At the risk of digressing even further and wider, I'm wondering how different is the view of film school and being a beginning filmmaker now versus 25 years ago when I started.
Let's get into Kim's backstory. You have no excuses now. You're gonna tell us everything. Go.
Because of the higher cost of entry, the barrier of entry. I mean, like the barrier of entry, just even getting into film school or starting some sort of course was even higher. And I think for that reason, probably that whole access to the equipment was a much bigger factor in choosing film school, yes or no?
Yes.
Which meant that majority of students would do some kind of self-study beforehand, before even considering applying to film school.
Absolutely.
When I applied for film school, I had an interest in cinematography, but didn't really see myself capable enough in terms of technical, mathematically, practically.
It's exactly how I feel sometimes.
But even so, I had an understanding that I needed to understand basics, things like exposure triangle, like your ISO, shutter speed, f-stops. I knew that. I knew that a basic understanding of composition in art, in visual art, was going to be crucial and helpful. Having a basic understanding of screenwriting, basic understanding of crew procedures, and just the whole kind of idea that films weren't going to be made with just a filmmaker and an actor, a performer.
Yeah. I
That
think
was ingrained in everyone who was even considering applying to film school. Those kind of level of things, everyone went to the effort of at least reading up on that. Maybe not fully understanding, but at least having that kind of understanding.
I'm sure I read up on those things, but I'm pretty sure you've already overshadowed all of my previous understanding. I was very into writing before I went into film school. So like basic screenwriting knowledge was basically all that I had, but like I had no off the top of my head knowledge of like exposure triangle or composition. I'd heard of the rule of thirds. However, cinematography was something that only really jumped out at me when I was in film school, and only in the second half of film school anyway. Like I was there for 2 years. Technically, I've only been interested in cinematography as like a career direction for 1 year of my life. So like there's a bit of a difference there where I wasn't actually setting myself up for the area I would later find out that I want to work in, because I was setting myself up to work in writing, which I still want to work in. But like I had no clue that I was even interested in cinematography, so there's no prior knowledge of that at all. I have a camera and I used that to make my old shorts, but I did all the auto settings. Exposure triangle, I would have gotten that wrong. I would have given it a red hot go, like guessing what it is, but I would have gotten it wrong if I had been asked.
I'm wondering how much of that is a difference in approach to tertiary education, how much of that is a difference in approach to the underlying understanding of what the medium is and what the medium requires, how much of it is a difference in the perceived effort necessary to become a professional in a field of filmmaking.
It was definitely, I think, a kind of warped perception of what a cinematographer was. I think a lot of people have that now, because I think social media has given people the impression that like whenever you see a social media account about like epic cinematography, top 10 cinematic moments, it's like silhouette shot from $3 million movie, $3 billion movie, shot of a building on fire, silhouette shot, blood on a white wall, and that's it. And it gives you this impression that cinematographers are just these people who make pretty images. And I was not into I had the impression that the director was the person in charge of like all the other stuff, and the cinematographer was the person who sat down and went like, okay, I think we should put a pretty image here, and like make it this color. So I had a really warped perception of the actual roles. And also a lot of it was the assumption that tertiary education would teach me these things. And it did. So there's a lot of stuff, gaps in my knowledge. I wouldn't be in a rush to fill them because I knew that I was going to film school and they were probably filled by that, you know?
That's been one of my big surprises, if you call it that, in teaching. My generation, we would, like I said, we would pre-study, so to speak. Whereas the current generation, it seems like there is an expectation that we are going to come into film school completely with no knowledge, experience, or skill at all.
Yeah.
And everything's just going to be built up from scratch.
And
Am I off base with that observation?
it's kind of something that I kind of struggle with, is that like when someone comes into film school with no knowledge of it at all, which I know that I didn't have, like I had a hobbyist's interest in it and knew that it was what I wanted to pursue, but I obviously didn't have a very fantastic knowledge. When someone comes in with no knowledge, your instinct is to think, why are you here? Because if you cared, you'd research it. But like also by that logic, also my brain thinks that why do all that research when I'm going to go to tertiary education and learn it there? Like I'm in two minds about that, because an indicator of wanting to be in a university is that you're passionate about what you're doing, and when you're passionate about it, you want to learn about it. And there are a lot of things that I learned about out of necessity when I was making my own little funny films that are like, but then when someone comes in with no knowledge at all, it makes you think, are you passionate about this? Are you actually interested? Or are you just here? However, maybe they are passionate about it and they want to use tertiary education as a way to get to know it better, which is also what I wanted to do. Like I was in both of those camps. I've been honestly on that like pre-study note. A lot of my film school experience has been setting myself up for post-study. Like halfway through the course, I was like, I need to get on top of teaching myself things more and finding new ways to learn and to live and like breathe and eat this industry at all
Way of
times and
life.
make it my way of life, which I've been trying to do. This is part of it. This is an excellent way of keeping me on an IV drip of learning new information. It's fantastic. Script reading really helps with that. And also just like holding yourself accountable and forcing yourself to do things.
Yeah, I think the kind of moment where I went kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? The one that really kind of exemplifies it for me is 1 year. I think it was your cohort, not your class, a different class out of your cohort,
Part of the special class.
where I had to stop everything and physically walk through linear perspective and convergence points.
See, that's the thing. I didn't know what that was. I
Which,
knew I was aware of it. I was aware of
which to
convergence
me,
points, but like,
as a kind of like you want to work in a photographic visual medium, I guess it would be kind of like an analogy of you go to chef school and you have to be taught and explained how boiling works.
yeah. And then there's a part of my brain that thinks, isn't that the point? What's a chef school if it can't teach someone how to boil something? You know, like it's
So yeah, I'm curious there. Like
yeah,
my generation would be like, we want to start the education with certain a base level of presumed knowledge and
mm,
understanding.
mm. And
Whereas it
again, there are.
seems
Sorry, go on.
whereas it seems your generation kind of sees tertiary education as a way of gaining that base level.
Yeah, that's the way I've seen it.
For my liking, and do bear in mind that I came up in a different educational system by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
But for my liking, there is so much I would have liked to be able to start with a base of presumed knowledge and
Mm,
understanding. Let me give you another example. So, like that whole linear perspective is one that's kind of. I had another one
yeah.
with
Sorry
my
about that one.
trimester one students just a few months ago, where this constant kind of struggle with initially with students, like what's a scene, as in SCENE. Yes. See? And then next is kind of what is story? What makes a
Then
story a
again,
story?
these are all so broad. They're words that we use on a regular basis out of context. I don't know if I could give you a fantastic definition of scene. I don't know if I can do that because when I write a scene, I mean scene in a screenplay, which can mean any time the location or time changes. Like
One particular sequence that appears to take place in continuous time and continuous space. So
yeah.
once you break the time, once you break the space, it's a different scene.
Mm.
End of story.
And that is something that is a definition that I learned in film school, by the way. Like I had a broad stroked idea of the word, but that is still the issue is that it's breaking the barrier between casual conversation about film
Uh-huh.
and professional conversation. Because if
Yep.
I'm talking to someone who doesn't give a shit about movies, about a movie that they like, even if it doesn't fit the strict definition of a scene, if someone's talking about a scene in the movie they like, or a sequence that they like, or even a 10-second moment that they like, they'll be like, oh, the scene where he cried was excellent. And I'll be like, yeah, great scene, wonderful. Because I'm not going to be like, actually, that's a sequence. Like it's also trying to break through the barrier of just mainstream discussion about movies, which is something that's still kind of a faux pas to correct people on, rightly so, you know?
Certainly would make my life a heck of a lot easier if a
Mm,
lot of these kind of very basic definitions were already ingrained when we
mm,
started, as opposed to having to actually start there. And I think part of the problem is, and I'm part of it myself. I need to get better at this myself for sure, and that is kind of like gauging where is that level. where can I actually start? As in, I've been
Okay.
I've been subconsciously starting as if XYZ level of knowledge is already there. Then you
Mm.
get like a couple of weeks into it and then suddenly realize, okay, it isn't there. Then you have to backtrack and fill in. So I
Hmm.
guess that is kind of the question about what did you think mattered versus what actually matters comes from. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, my ultimate you didn't know moment for cinematography came quite late in terms of what I thought mattered versus what actually mattered. And it was because of the difference between the two of my projects. Obviously, when you shoot something, 70% of the time your priority is that it looks that it's nice to look at, it's pleasing. Like it's not necessarily like aesthetically like pretty, but it's like, you can look at it and take it all in. It isn't ugly unless it's deliberately ugly. Getting to the point.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that I shot that I was proud of, which is my second to most recent project, was a music video. It was in a beautiful garden. It's on my Instagram account at Ethan Steele DP.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and
I'm gonna have to check it out.
he's gonna have to check it out, give it a
Don't
like and
troll you.
subscribe and comment. He's gonna go. I would actually love a comment from you saying this is awful. This sucks.
Okay, this
That would.
is okay.
I'm
Sorry,
just saying. Everyone else is
let me.
saying, "Oh wow, this is so pretty." Yeah. I'm going to hold you to that, by the way. I'm holding you to that. Give me a negative comment. As I was saying earlier, after the shameless plug, the first kind of like thing where I was happy to put my credit on like a cinematographer, Ethan Steele, a music video with a lot of themes about dreaming and daydreaming and everything, which is actually very, very, in hindsight, was a fantastic thing to start doing cinematography on. So we used a nice long lens, and we used a lot of slow motion and made sure that it was like we were going to hit golden hour at some point. And what we created were a bunch of, if I do this to myself, well exposed, which was my priority. I was still getting a handle on exposure, so
Mhm.
well exposed. That was my technical struggle at the time, and aesthetically pleasing images, that look nice. And I was like, yes, brilliant, wonderful. And prior to film school, I came in thinking that cinematography was about making images look nice. Then again, I did come in from like a perspective that it wasn't going to be at any point my focus, but like it is now. And then I worked on my narrative short, which I had more of an attachment to as well because I'd written it. In hindsight, continuity of space, guys, it's terrible. God, Christ, like that was I finished that off and I went, this is a fundamental that I was not aware of at all. And I had been made aware of it several times in class, but because our practice, unlike your experience, was that putting it into practice happened so rarely relative to the amount of times we just talked about the information, it was something that I learnt through it up. Like, there are a lot of shots that I'm very, very happy with, but also, you know, I had to learn because I screwed it up. Like and that was my number one takeaway is the space. It's all about capturing the space. That's your number one priority at first, or at least for me now. Now that I have gone through the crucible of getting it a bit wrong and making it difficult for my poor editor to piece it all together to make it look coherent. And I'm sure the editor is going to do it fantastically because they're great. But like, God, man, it's rough. It's rough. Yeah. No, but that's all. I'm still happy with my work on that. But my number one gripe is like two shots in the entire thing where I just go, God, that before I knew anything about filmmaking, I would have been able to watch the short that I made a year ago and been like, wow, that's so cool. But I also would have been 10 years old, you know? And when I was 10, I was really dumb and stupid and an idiot, and my standards were lower. And there was one point I remember when I made one of my shorts when I was doing the 24/7 film fest when I was 14, and it's this film festival for like kids where you make it in one day, and I remember looking at it and going, it looks so good. But that's because I had only shot on a phone before then, and my standards were lower because I had no idea how far I could actually go. And now that I'm in film school, where I know that the movies that I watch recreationally, the feature length films, are the standard that I am trying to achieve to a certain extent. And at certain points when I watch like shows on the ABC with a smaller budget, and I go, that's where I want to be. Now that that exists somewhere within my grasp, like needless to say, probably in the next decade, like in a long term, but like because that exists somewhere in my grasp, everything I make is dwarfed by it, you know? Because I
Yeah.
know that if I just get everything right, I do have the mental capacity to make something that I think works. But you just don't. That's not how humans work. You are going to forget to do something, and you are going to miss a small detail, and you are going to waltz over a small part of the creative process that you should have focused on, or you know, an idea is going to be inhibited by what you think is right, or your inhibitions are going to be. It's a whole thing. Like, but I need to get past all of these inhibitions I have about like the whole creative process, and that's very frustrating. It's a craft where you put a bunch of pieces together and you
Mm-hmm.
have to think about it scientifically. There's literally an if then kind
Yeah.
of approach you can take to it, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
something I had to learn over time because there's so much about it being like free expression and art and doing whatever you want, which is true, but you also just kind of learn that there's a certain
But
that there is a
if
tool
you
set
do
you need
that,
to
then
then exactly
this might happen
you
that
actually,
you hadn't thought of.
yeah.
I think we seem to agree to the view of the film school learning experience looks different when we start compared to when we finish.
Yeah.
And I think we both seem to agree that a big part of that difference comes down to the process and structure of filmmaking. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. The whole craft, everything.
I guess before we leave that, how much of that do you think is a difference between thinking of filmmaking as subconsciously as a hobby, something that you do for you, as opposed to thinking of filmmaking as a profession, something
Profession.
that you do
Yeah.
for a living?
You do move on to the whole like the profession mindset with
Mm,
film school. It teaches you the way you should be thinking.
mm,
However, I think there's also kind there like I like a little bit of freedom is nice. Like I still write. I've never had a screenplay produced ever, so this could
mm.
change if I find out
Well, I
that
mean,
no one likes what
your
I
short
write.
films, aren't they produced?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, good point. Outside of film school, I've never had a screenplay produced ever.
See,
But
that was him putting himself down, not me. I had nothing to do with it.
fucking, it's just it's just the premise of the show. I'm just programmed to do it. I've never had one outside of film school produce, but I know that I'm very comfortable to write silly little screenplays with like silly stuff and surrealism and all these things that I really love, and it really does feel like I'm doing it for myself a lot of the time.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's going to change. It might not, because I think there are a lot of filmmakers who do what they want, but that's because they have the right to do that. They've established themselves in a way that allows them to do what they want. So we'll see about that.
Looking back now, if you were to start film school again with the knowledge and experience you have had, would you do anything different?
I actually don't know. I have a very, very strong mindset of contentedness with every single thing I do. Or like, I'd probably write more in my free time. I probably would have. I think that I would have done something to the effect of just like practice more on my own. But then again, I say that, but I know that if I were sent back in time through film school, I'd probably go like, no, I have assessments to do. I've got other stuff to do. It's fine. Like, but I'd probably because it took me a fair amount of time to develop the whole practice philosophy, where you know fun fact, film school gives you the tools, but you're the one who has to keep doing it over and over again to get good at it. So like I like yeah, I would have written more, I would have focused more on my output and my habit and everything. Because that's the best way you can improve once you have the tools is to write more. Same goes for cinematography. That's a whole other conversation. But I don't know if I would have done much else different. I'm not sure. I don't know if maybe I'm not far out enough. Maybe that's a good like a 6 month from now, year from now question. I'm
Sure.
I might
Let's
not even be
pencil
far.
in that episode.
Yeah, let's pencil that in right now. And if the viewer who is watching this right now isn't here to watch that episode, you're a fake fan. You're not real. One of the two viewers watching this right now.
He will find you.
You better be there. I'll find you.
Let me ask you this. Are there certain knowledge and understanding that you think would have benefited from having prior to starting film school?
Oh, well, anything. Yeah, that's like literally anything at all. Like I think especially for like camera and lighting, all of those units very information dense. All the cinematography stuff, having prior knowledge would have been pretty helpful. I didn't and still don't have a confident technical understanding of cameras, so that would have been nice. But like I'm not confident enough to say in hindsight I would have done more. It would be cool, but this is where we get into the philosophy of like what tertiary education has to offer us, and I think it should be offering us knowledge. A lot of unis now are saying, come here to learn this, start, this is where you start. And I was like, yeah, wonderful, brilliant. If that's what you're asking me to give you my money for, then I'll go with that assumption. It's great to know things before you come in, and I did know things, just not in the right area. Like I didn't know I was going to be so interested in cinematography. I knew stuff about writing. The moral of the story, to sum things up, is should you go to film school? Maybe, if you feel like it. Will you get a good output? Potentially.
Depends on you.
Depends. Who knows? I don't know. I've got a podcast.